Hey everybody, welcome back to Sounds Like a Drum, Kane's independent media production. Today, we are exploring options for improvising a Snom, a baritone snare. How close can we get with a regular snare, and are these experiments possibly going to damage your drums in the process? If you've been with us for any length of time, you've probably seen some video on here where we've been exploring deep tune snares and even snares that are specifically designed for deep tuning. That's not what we're doing today. What we're doing today is actually going in on an experiment that we saw online. We're not going to name names because this is about the safety of the methodology and we are here to be critical. That's what we like to do here. So this is going to be about actually analyzing whether or not this is a smart thing to do to your drums and whether the sound that we get out of it is worth it. And this has to do with connecting a standard snare drum to the bottom of a standard floor tom to, in effect, make a giant snare drum. There are a lot of factors that go into this, specifically with regards to what could be dangerous to these drums. So before we do any of this, please remember that your results may vary. The danger to the instruments is real, so if you choose to do this, we do not accept culpability for that. If anything, hopefully this will show you whether or not this is a good idea. Additionally, stay with us to the end because we are going to show you a way to get a deeper snare sound out of your drum without actually changing the drum itself. Since we've removed the bottom head of the floor tom and the batter head of the snare, we have a single column of air going from the batter on the floor tom straight through to the snare wires, effectively giving us a 17.5-inch deep snare drum at a 14-inch diameter. For today, again, we're not going to do any EQing or processing at all. You're just going to hear the raw sounds. And to get as close as we can, we are adding in an E-ring on top to quell some overtones and give us the body that we like from a Snom kind of drum. All right, without further ado, let's hear it. Right out of the gate, this is a really interesting sound. It is super punchy. It almost sounds like a combination of a snare and a kick drum because it's tuned so low. And additionally, that distance between those heads is giving us a pretty dead sound overall, even if we turn the wires off. This means for us that, especially with a ring on there, we're not dealing with any crazy overtones. We're getting primarily a punch and then wires beneath that. For this Frankenstein drum that we built, here's what we did. We're using a 14-inch floor tom with 8 lugs, and we're using a 14-inch snare drum that also has 8 lugs. This is necessary for them to be able to marry together. We've removed the resonant head from the tom, and we've removed the batter head from the snare drum, so that we basically have a bottom half of a drum and a top half of a drum with no heads in between. Next, we're using one of the hoops, not two, to connect them by using 4 of the tension rods going downward into the snare drum and then the remaining 4 going upward into the floor tom lugs. We're alternating them for even pressure, but we're really not tuning them super tight. This is just about attaching them physically to the drum and not about tensioning the drums together. The other reason that we are only tensioning these rods up to finger tight is because we can't actually get a standard drum key in there because, as you can see, the screws are right next to the body of the drum, whether we're on the top drum or the bottom one, so there's really no other solution at this point. The snare drum is effectively hanging beneath the floor tom, and the bearing edges are touching all the way around the circumference. Now, if this sounds alarming to you, it should, because the bearing edge is a very sensitive portion of any drum, and striking it, damaging it, splitting it, doing anything to it is going to affect the performance of both of the instruments. These drums are literally one on top of the other, put together at the bearing edges. So again, finger tight, the drum is hanging below the floor tom so there's no weight on it. And additionally, we're going to be playing no rim shots today on this drum because we don't want to risk the possibility of any vibrational damage happening where the bearing edges are touching. The question becomes whether or not all of this rigmarole here is worth it, given that we are threatening the edges of two drums here. It took a while to put this together, and it's not exactly easy to transport because now it doesn't fit in the floor tom's case anymore. Let's say that we've decided that we love this sound and we want to use it all the time. If we were going for a more permanent solution using these drums, the first thing that we would do is figure out some kind of gasket option to go in between the two drums made out of some kind of rubber or maybe foam rubber to make sure that the bearing edges are not getting damaged in the course of these drums vibrating against each other. The second thing that we would look for is a drum key that doesn't have the traditional T shape, but rather looks more like a ratchet or something like that, where we could get in there and actually increase the tension to where we're getting a little more pressure between the two of them. Lastly, we didn't experiment with heads in this case at all, so if we started to get into other kinds of pre-muffled heads or different materials, that kind of thing, there could be a whole world of options here. That said, this is, as we say, a hack. It's not an easy solution. It's not an on-the-fly solution. It was a lot of work. The drums are in danger. Even just doing it correctly, we had to try a couple of times, so this is not a shortcut as much as it's an interesting experiment that does elicit a usable sound, but again, at what cost? At this point, you might be thinking, well, this is a solution for me because I don't have the money for a dedicated, super deep snare drum, and I want this kind of sound in the work that I'm doing. Rather than stressing out about whether or not we need to buy a new drum, we'd like to just demonstrate for you the possibilities inherent in the drum you already have. First things first, we've set up our tried and true 5-inch deep Supraphonic with essentially the same tuning and the exact same ring and the same heads as the Snom equivalent that we were using earlier. This drum gets us a pretty fat sound. Let's listen to the drum first. This seems to be giving us a tremendous amount of low end. Let's do a back-to-back comparison. This is a sound that I use all the time live in the studio just for fun, but there is a trick going on here. Let's hear this drum by itself. If it hasn't already come across to you, this is the effect of using the bass drum in conjunction with the snare drum on the backbeats, which is actually something that's super common in some styles of music and is expected, but can be used any time that you want to fatten up the sound of your backbeats. The added cool thing about this is that if we were using a gigantic Snom tuned this way, we only have that one sound. And if we're going for kick and snare together on the backbeats and we want to thin out the snare sound, we just stop playing the kick and then bring it back later to give us another option. This is a sound that's also common in a lot of electronic music where they will remove low end for a section and then bring it back for emphasis. And frankly, it's something that once I discovered how to do that on the kit, I started using all the time. The thing that we're really hoping that you take away from this is that you don't necessarily need to buy new gear to get sounds that you don't have yet, and you definitely don't need to risk the health of the gear that you have just because you saw or heard a sound online that was intriguing. There are a lot of myths and a lot of hacks out there that are easily usable and that are a shortcut to something that will expand your music, but there are just as many that could possibly risk the life of your equipment, waste a bunch of your time, and maybe even not get you the thing that you thought it was going to get. Unfortunately, by the very nature of social media as it is now, things like this that jump out at you and that seem extreme and wild and never before seen are getting the most views and getting the most attention without necessarily showing us just how much we don't need this and how much extra work it's going to be, and that it's a time suck, frankly, to look at them and then to go down the rabbit hole trying to make it yourself. Added to that, the fact that we're talking about actually risking the instrument's health and longevity, that ultimately we want to still work after we do these experiments, is all the more reason why we here especially want to address these things and save you the trouble of possibly damaging your stuff, wasting your time, and then ending up going back to a Supraphonic and just tuning it lower. Don't misunderstand us. We love experimentation. We love exploration. We love hacks. We love myths. We love busting myths, all of that. However, when it comes to the possibility of damaging your gear for the sake of spectacle because somebody got a lot of views and became an expert because their video has a lot of views, we have to step in and say something, because we don't have extra money lying around either. These drums matter. They're tools for us, and we really love how they sound. So we want to save you from having a negative experience and realize that watching those things online is enough of a blast, but it doesn't mean that we have to go down deep on these things and ultimately risk everything that we have. Particularly for this episode, we really hope that you enjoyed this journey and seeing exactly what we got out of it, and also end runs around spending that time on something that really we don't actually need to do. If you liked it, please follow the link below to the Patreon. It's the best way to help us continue to make these episodes. Check it out, see if there's a contribution that's right for you. A lot of extra content on there. As well, please like, comment, and subscribe. And do tell us if you ever got into trouble with trying out an experiment on your drums, whether it was damaged or didn't get you the sound that you were looking for. There's a lot online right now to inspire us, but there's also a lot on there that we should probably stay away from.